Hello and welcome back to Scaled Down Customs. This is going to be part 3, continuing the build on the Revell 69 Pontiac GTO, the Judge build. So we're going to jump right into bare metal foil. Couple tools is going to be a fresh, very sharp number 11 X-Acto blade, because if your blade isn't sharp, it'll actually tear the bare metal foil. And one trick that I've seen other people do, and I've picked it up and I'm doing it as well, is since the blade is also chrome or silver, it's really hard to see the edge of the blade against the chrome on the foil. So if you just add a little marker on there, you can get a black, you can get a contrast so you can see that blade a little bit easier against when you're trimming up your foil. All right, another thing we're going to use is a toothpick to kind of burnish it down, and then some cotton buds. This is to me a Q-tip, and then this is just a regular cotton Q-tip, and of course our bare metal foil. All right, so generally what I do is I just kind of measure roughly kind of how long I need it, about 5 inches, and then when I'm cutting it off the sheet, I'll actually use a different X-Acto blade. So I'll kind of rotate them through. This one I know is my fresh blade, and then I'll move this blade to this one, and then I'll dispose of this blade. So that way I kind of know this one's my fresh, sharp blade, and this one's still pretty sharp, and it still has a lot of use for cutting on the models and stuff. So, and then you want it to be wider than your application point, and then we're gonna need some tweezers as well. I find if you kind of pull up and away from, if you kind of pull it back on itself, it curls it up a little bit more, makes it a little bit harder to work with. And then we're just gonna stick it on there. And then we want to burnish this down. And then also just kind of get that to lay down in the corners a little bit. And then just very lightly, just basically let the knife do the cutting, but just very lightly kind of just score. You're cutting it, but you just want to just lightly drag the knife across that foil. And then once we cut it, we want to burnish it down into the grooves again, just to get that down there nice and tight. And then use the Q-tip to kind of really smooth that off. And then for the overlap underneath, I'll kind of just pull that back out just a little bit, and then just kind of lightly slice that along the edge. And that's it. Then you can just kind of burnish it down again after you cut it. Also, one of the keys to nice looking bare metal foil trim is of course your prep, just like paint. The smoother you can get where you're going to be applying your chrome, the better it will look once it's on, because this stuff will conform to any bump, crevice, crack, wiggle. It'll really conform to any shape that's underneath that. So you want to just make sure you get your window trims as smooth as the rest of your car. All right, so I'm going to keep working on the rest of the trim, and we'll just get her all chromed up. Sometimes it'll actually peel, it'll break away, and you'll be left with some residual where you don't want it. And sometimes if you can just lightly scrape at it with the toothpick, it'll actually come up a little bit. get a little bit of a curve and it starts to wrinkle a little bit, just give it a little slit right in the corner at a 45-degree angle. And that'll help it to release a little bit of tension and conform a little bit more for you. And if you can, try to avoid burnishing down your edges. Gives you a little bit easier access to grab those and pull them off. So sometimes you won't get your corners to line up, or you'll get a little tear, or for example, there's a little bit of a gap right there and a tear. It's really small to see, but a lot of times I've gotten those to kind of disappear or blend in with a little bit of chrome malto pen. Just kind of dab that in there and it'll hide those corners and tears for you pretty well. So for the wheel wells, some of the panel lines are a little bit too shallow and I didn't scribe them out deep enough beforehand, so they're going to be a little bit too shallow, and I can try to put some foil on there. But what I'm going to try this time is the Malto pen. This is the 4mm head on this one. I find the larger head on this pen I have a lot more control with, so I can just kind of scribe around or paint around these edges with a lot more control than the fine tip marker. So I'm just going to paint some chrome around these trim edges, and we'll see how that does. Alright, that looks pretty good. We're going to let that dry up. So this Malto chrome, it takes quite a long time to dry, so be sure and let that dry up for a good long time, and then try not to handle it too much because it will rub off. So that's looking pretty good. We're going to let that dry up and move on to painting some other parts. So for the door handles and door locks, I'm going to detail paint that with some Malto liquid chrome, but this is a refill for the chrome pens, but I find that I like to paint this on a little bit on some of those details, and I find it works rather well. So just a couple of drops out, and then using your favorite paintbrush and trying not to bump my wet areas, and then we're just going to detail paint this Malto chrome just like we would any other paint. And one of the tricks with painting with this chrome is you want it to go on pretty thick so it can kind of pool up, which will give it that chrome effect. Alright, so I'm going to let that dry up before I try to do anything else and bump it. So let's keep moving forward with painting some of the other pieces. Alright, so we're going to start painting up some of these other pieces. So I've got all my parts categorized for colors, so these are all going to be semi-gloss black. So we're going to go paint up these. All right, so I've got a bunch of the parts painted up. I sprayed some aluminum on a couple of the other pieces as well, and for the engine block I want to do the Pontiac engine blue, and I don't have that color on hand right now, so we're going to try to custom mix this up a little bit. So I'm going to be using Tamiya chrome silver and Tamiya blue. We'll be using some Tamiya lacquer thinner to kind of thin that down for airbrushing, but we're going to see if we can custom mix some of this and get a light metallic blue for the engine block. All right, so I used 1 mil of the silver and maybe 6 or 8 drops of the blue. It's a little more metallic looking than I wanted. So I usually thin my Tamiya paints down at a 1-to-1 ratio. So since I did 1 mil of the silver and a couple drops of the blue, we're just gonna do just over 1 mil of the lacquer thinner. All right, that's looking pretty good. So let's get this transmission masked up and we'll go paint the engine block. All right, so it almost worked, but I don't think the blue wanted to mix with that metallic very well, so it's kind of the blue color is a little inconsistent. So what I'm going to try to do this time is we're going to mix again, but I'm going to get my hue right with, or my tone, with white and blue, and then add a little bit of flat aluminum just to give it that little metallic look. But let's get the color right first, then we'll add a little bit of silver to it. All right, looks like that's stabilizing a little bit better. The blue still separating out a little bit, but I think with that white in there, it's kind of helping it blend a little bit better. So let's go spray that engine block and we'll try that again. All right, looks a little better. The color's a lot more even. So a little more baby blue and not as much metallic as I would like, but that looks a lot better. So we'll let that dry up and then we'll put a wash on there. All right, so while we're waiting for that engine to dry up, our gloss black has dried and it's ready for its top coat of chrome. So we're going to go spray that, and I've also just masked up the gas tank on the chassis because I want to spray that aluminum, so we're going to do that as well. We got the chrome on there, looking pretty good. It's kind of a fine art because you're just kind of really lightly dust on the coats until you get the consistency you like. But this one kept looking a little bit grainy, so I kept putting a little bit more on, and it kind of ended up being a little bit more of a dull chrome or a shiny aluminum look. So this is the difference between what the kit chrome and the sprayed chrome will look like. Again, I think I made this a little bit too dull. I don't know, I just think that looks a lot better in my opinion, but you know, if you don't want to go through the process of stripping down the kit chrome, then don't do it. Just use it as it is. If you like it, that's perfectly fine. Here's what that aluminum looks like compared to the chrome, and you can see that does look a little bit more like a chrome over the regular aluminum, but still, that came out a little bit duller than I wanted it to be. But because these coats are really just dusted on there, we want to get a protectant on there so that chrome does not just rub off, because it will if you handle it at all. So to do that, we're just going to be using the Alclad Aqua Gloss Clear and just put a couple of coats on there just to seal that chrome in there. Alright, looks pretty good. Alright, so while we're letting this chrome stuff dry up, we can go back to our engine block and we're going to put a wash on there just to make that look a little bit more realistic. Alright, so for weathering, lately I've been using this Mr. Hobby Mr. Weathering color. This is the multi-black, and then I'll thin it back down or take it back off with the Mr. Hobby, the Solvent 110. So we're going to put this on pretty heavy, and then we're going to start taking it back off with the Solvent 110. Alright, so there we go. So that's kind of the look we're going after. Not to make it look totally covered in oil and grime, but just to darken those shadows a little bit and bring out those highlights. So that's kind of the look we're going for. So I'll show you a little bit, I'll show you the before and after so you can really see a side-by-side comparison on the difference that makes. All right, let's get this engine detail painted up and get this thing together. right, so I'm going to let that dry up. We'll be ready to move on to some detail painting and installation for the interior, get the chassis finished up, and hopefully be ready for some final assembly soon. So I think that'll do it for this video. Make sure you stay tuned for the next one. We'll be sure and get this thing finished up in the next video. I think I talked too much in this one, but anyway, thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.